1805. The Russian Army. Russia and Austria sign a pact to attack Imperial France. The Russian army now has to mobilize to join the Austrians against Emperor Napoleon. One of the assembly points is Pskov, where the St. Petersburg's dragoons have just arrived, presenting arms. The local artillery regiment is equally waiting for further orders to move, waiting together with the local Pskov Fusiliers, ready for the long march southwest. They are joined by the 6th Jaegers, a light infantry regiment. Russia was ruled at the time by the Romanov Tsar Alexander I. The Romanovs showed similarity to the central role of the Habsburgs in the Austrian Empire, except that Russia was ruled more autocratically. Russia's history was considerably harsher, with violent oppressive rule since the Mongol yoke of Genghis Khan, which was finally removed around 1480. The Russian territory remained a factious warlord region until the establishment of Tsardom, uniting the regions around Moscow, creating a uniting system of leadership in which the Tsar was both the emperor and the religious leader through the Orthodox Church. Combined with a harsh climate, vast empire with large distances between cities and differences in culture, everything revolved around the court of the Tsar in Moscow, and closeness to the Tsar meant considerable increase in power, wealth, land, and people under your rule. It was an unstable system of changes in balance of power, with the Tsar as the only constant. The large number of serfs created an unlimited supply of conscripts for the army. Serfs formed a large portion of the Russian populace, and they were owned by the squabbling nobility. The Orthodox Russians, including serfs, worshipped the Tsar as the representative of God on earth, a sort of Orthodox Pope, and the only figure they felt was able to create stability in the land. The intrigues within the Romanov Tsar family meant that the guard units around Moscow were always considered important, playing an important role in the various coups between family members for the position of Tsar, functioning like the Praetorian Guard of the old Rome. In 1805, 2 Life Guard infantry units, the Semenovsky and the Zmailovsky Life Guard infantry units from Moscow, were ready to march to Austria. They were joined by the cavalry of the Empress Cuirassiers, the Life Guard Cuirassiers, and the Imperial Guard Hussars. The Life Guard artillery would equally join the Tsar on his first major campaign, in which the young Tsar was confident he would be able to defeat Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. 3 line infantry regiments from around Moscow would join them too, with each line regiment distinguishable by a unique collar combination of the neck collar, cuffs, and epaulets. The remaining regiments had to be gathered from around the empire, similar as it's known from an enemy of Russia that a march to Moscow is long and difficult, traveling cumbersome bad roads. In the same manner, mobilization and concentration of an army traveling to Austria was a logistical nightmare and taking a considerable time. Moscow was the traditional old center of orthodoxy for the empire, with St. Petersburg the new center, connecting Russia to Europe through its Baltic port. St. Petersburg shifted the power of Russia westwards, with several regiments from around the city established by Peter the Great a century before. Stationed at St. Petersburg, the Preobrazhensk Life Guard infantry unit would march to Austria as well, together with the already mentioned St. Petersburg dragoons, while 2 line infantry units from the St. Petersburg surroundings called Ingermanland equally joined them. The name Ingermanland showed the Germanic influence in this Baltic region, a leftover from the Teutonic Knights Order. This region was a battleground between the Russians, the Swedes, and the Lithuanian and Polish Commonwealth. eventually conquered by Peter the Great a century before. Equally marching to Austria were regiments from the nearby Baltic seaports of Narva and Viborg, previously ruled by the Swedes. These regiments were joined on the march by nearby regiments from the old Russian garrison cities of Pskov and Novgorod, former frontier cities against old Swedish expansion. 2 regiments would have a long and arduous march, coming from the far north. 1 regiment from the most northern seaport of Arkhangelsk. Before Russia gained the Baltic seaports, the only seaport of Russia, frozen over for about 6 months of the year. The other remote regiment from Perm, in the foothills of the Urals. 5 line regiments would come from the wider area around Moscow, using the old regimental names of the cities. The regiments from the Yaroslavs, from Vladimir, from Ryazan, Vyazma, and a dragoon regiment from Tver. 3 line regiments were from the southern part of Old Russia: Smolensk, Bryansk, and Kursk. 3 regiments from the far southern border, regions from the conquest of Peter the Great: the Azov Regiment, the Asferon Regiment, and an elite grenadier regiment called the Phanagoria Regiment. On the other side, the closest line regiment to Austria was the Galitz Regiment, which originated from the area of what is now Moldova. After the conquest of Ukrainian territory and suppression of the hetman system of Cossacks, which accelerated under Katerina the Great, several regiments would come from the Ukrainian territories. 2 elite infantry regiments came from Kiev in Ukraine: the Kiev Grenadiers and the Grenadier Regiment with the now controversial name of Little Russia. 5 more regiments would come from the territory of Ukraine, and these were all cavalry regiments, indicating the superb horsemanship of the Cossack region. Using the old Imperial Russian names: 2 dragoon regiments from the north, the Kharkov and Chernigov regiments, and 3 hussar regiments, the Elizabethgrad, the Pavlovgrad, and the Mariupol regiment. This large plodding army, drawn from many regions, would slowly move to Austria. From these regions, 4 light regiments were drawn, called Jägers, showing the German influence on the Russian army: the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th light regiments. Similar to Austria, the army was led by an officer corps drawn from noble families close to the Tsar, which were not necessarily chosen on merit. This created the same problem as within the Austrian army, as explained in a previous video, of inexperienced officers with limited understanding of how to lead an army or carry out complex maneuvers or campaigns. Several of the most senior generals were experienced and competent. The overall commander would be the experienced and competent General Kutuzov, a cautious general eventually proven right by advising against engaging Napoleon at Austerlitz, but he was overruled by Tsar Alexander, spoiling for a fight. The Russian soldier, when conscripted, would become part of the army for 25 years and never see its birthplace again. The regiment would become its brotherhood, or artel, with strict discipline and rules, with communal responsibility for feeding, clothing, and payment, creating strict cohesion. This was frequently combined with the spirit of orthodoxy, verging on superstition, with a high loyalty to the Tsar. While the core of Austrians were Catholic, similar to the French, the Russians could frame the war against Napoleon as a religious struggle against an almost infidel foreign force of new ideas from the West. Being used to extremely harsh conditions and discipline within Russian society, the Russian soldier was used to extremes. French generals described them sometimes as robots, walking into their own death without complaint, but they kept going. This made them a formidable force, which would eventually prevail and follow the French all the way to Paris in 1814. However, in 1805, all the flaws of the Russian army would be exposed first, through a masterclass in tactical superiority, superior training and command structure of Napoleon Bonaparte at the field of Austerlitz. Thank you very much for watching and listening to my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please leave feedback in the comment section on aspects where I made mistakes or where you disagree or agree, or what parts you enjoyed particularly. I enjoy making these videos, but they do take a long time to make, especially as I'm still learning a lot about creating animations and trying to make sure all the uniforms and regiments are accurate for the right time. Please consider subscribing or sharing my videos if you enjoy them. Many thanks for watching, I truly appreciate it.